Hey there, this is Ryan Clancy for another edition of No Labels Talks. I am here by myself this week. My co-pilot, Holly Page, is moving her son into college. This is a couple weeks after she went and got married. I'm going to have to talk to Holly about getting her priorities straight. Constantly putting her family in front of this podcast is really going to cause tension between us. But I will get over it. And it'll just be me here for a moment. We really were excited to be able to bring back this week Mark Halperin and Chris McNulty. Mark Halperin from Wide World of News and Two-Way, Chris McNulty from Causeway Solutions, which is a political data company. We've done a couple panels with them before on the back end of the Republican National Convention. Now we wanted to have them back on the back end of the Democratic National Convention. Mark Halperin in particular was on the ground there. And both of them really had some exceptional insights about, in Mark's case, what he heard on the ground at the convention out in Chicago. And in Chris's case, what he's seeing in the polling and the modeling, some of which is pretty surprising. So rather than sit here and talk to myself for much longer, we're just going to keep it short and get you right into the podcast. No Labels Talks with Mark Halperin and Chris McNulty. Hey everybody, welcome to this week's edition of No Labels Talks, where we've got a couple familiar faces, but for those of you who aren't familiar with them, let me just introduce them both. Mark Halperin, who's the creator of Wide World of News concierge coverage, which offers readers exclusive insights into the world of politics built on unmatched reporting, and Two-Way, an interactive live video platform devoted to hosting unbiased discussions of the latest political news and issues. And Chris McNulty, who's the vice president of political insight at Causeway Solutions, where he oversees a best-in-class political data and analysis operation. I want to start with the convention. Mark was out at the convention for several days. Chris is a Republican they wouldn't have let in unless he snuck in. But Mark, you were not only at the convention, you were on the floor. What did you see and hear that maybe was above and beyond what those of us who weren't at the convention saw and heard?
Yeah, I mean, I'd highlight three things. One is the extraordinary technical proficiency that anyone in any party would have to acknowledge to turn a convention that had been planned for years, dedicated to Joe Biden, into one for Vice President Harris and Governor Walz. Just the sheer turning of the battleship was extraordinary and relatively seamless in terms of the signs, the graphics, the speakers program. It was really quite an accomplishment, and it speaks well of the prospect the vice president's team can go forward running a campaign for 75 days or so, again, under extraordinary circumstances of having switched from one candidate to another. Two, people from No Labels will be delighted or not to hear that easily the biggest ovation that anyone received was Elizabeth Warren. I've been in NBA finals and Stanley Cup finals. I've never felt an arena shake the way it did when Elizabeth Warren just was introduced before she said a word. I'm not sure what that's about, but it was quite something. And then lastly, I've covered every convention since '92, and typically one party is more optimistic than the other because the extraordinary events that took place between the Republican convention and the Democratic convention. Both conventions were featured delegates and activists and strategists and politicians who were sky high and extremely confident. That's what it pervaded in Milwaukee, is what pervaded in every conversation I had with folks in Chicago. And although there was greater confidence at the time amongst Republicans in Milwaukee, very striking how assured Democrats are. They don't think it's going to be a blowout necessarily, although some do, but they're very confident. Every conversation I had reflected a belief that the momentum that the vice president has will continue all the way through election day and will carry her to an unprecedented historic presidency.
Well, look, that's a good segue to ask a question of Chris. Do you think that confidence is well-founded? This week, former President Trump's pollster, Tony Fabrizio, put out a memo trying to shake the narrative a bit that this momentum we're seeing and the bounce in the polling that we're seeing for Vice President Harris is to be expected. They saw it coming. And in fact, there's a couple polls out over the last day or two, have her up nationally 4 or 5 points. NPR just did an analysis that shows she is now tied or toss up Nevada, North Carolina, Georgia, and Arizona. Those were all lean GOP just 3 weeks ago. Do you think the Democrats are right to feel confident that they're heading to victory?
Confident that they can win is what I think reality is, and might even be on the path to it today. Blowout win, I don't think so. I don't think that's in the cards. But the electorate has definitely shifted. I think if you go back to our call a few weeks ago, a month ago, whenever the last one was that we did of these, the Democrats had 2 problems. Even if you take Biden the candidate away, but as Biden the candidate with the electorate, one was swing voters were particularly high turnout swing voters, didn't want to vote for either candidate. They were very much a toss-up, just huge undecideds. And the issue set worked against the Democrats in that regard, with the exception of abortion. Number one problem. Number two problem they had was that bottom left box, that low turnout, mid turnout, hard Democrat, generally younger, more activist. You see, kind of it's being stereotypical, more people of color in that box that had really migrated away. And if you look at that group in particular, a candidate should be, the generic ballot should report how Democrat they are. The candidate should report to be right below that for hard Democrats. And what you saw was that group of voters was just nowhere on Joe Biden. I think Republicans in the Trump campaign kind of overstated that they were coming back to Republicans, and they were just migrating away from Joe Biden and that group of Democrats. They weren't coming to Republicans. And the biggest change in the electorate that we've seen is that group has kind of moved back. They're not on fire. And this is where I think the Democrats are a little bit over their skis. They're not on fire, but they have a pulse. They're listening. They're re-engaged. They're acting more like low and mid propensity hard Democrats should act in a presidential cycle than being absolutely without a pulse, which is where they went with Trump. So the Democrats had 2 issues, and they've started to put those back together. The Trump campaign has 2 issues as well. One was swing voters, which they were nowhere on as well, kind of double hater group, and a steady 10-15% of hard Republicans that are never Trump. And that group remains in our last group of polling. So the Democrats have corrected more problems than the Republicans with the electorate as a result of Harris and the convention.
I want to get to in a minute. I want to get to the Trump campaign and how they are maybe dealing with some of their perceived problems. But before we do that, Mark, I want to ask you about this in particular. It's been less than a month since Vice President Harris ascended to the top spot, and up until now, she has managed to stiff arm town halls, media interviews, because she could say, "Hey, I'm trying to pick a VP. I got a convention." We are now on the other side of that. The pressure is really building for her and Tim Walz to subject themselves to a little more scrutiny than they otherwise have. Where does that stand? Or from the conversations you had, can we expect a 60-minute sit down, some town halls? What's coming on the horizon?
Well, my standing joke is that her first interview will be with Jen Psaki, and the second interview will be with the cast of The West Wing for a podcast. Look, she's going to do an interview this week. If you ask me to actually guess, I bet Robin Roberts or Lester Holt or Gayle King would be my guess is who she'll do. Republicans will say that those aren't tough interviewers. If you look at their history of questioning Democratic presidential candidates, I think she'd do fine with those 3. Republicans who have sort of built this up as, well, she's going to do an interview and the house of cards is going to come tumbling down, I think it made an enormous mistake. I've known the vice president a long time. She's not a stupid person at all. She has lucked into, in the game of musical chairs, the best communications team she's had. Just so happens she's got the best people now. They know how to prepare her. They know how to pick the interviewer. They know how to handle it if there's any slip ups. So I think she'll do an interview this week, and I think it'll go fine for her. And they'll anticipate every question, and Republicans will have to find something else to hang their hat on, except the debate, which also she may not screw up.
Mark, just talk people about that little bit of inside baseball for a second, that you feel like she's got the best comms team she could possibly have. Who are these people, and why do you have such confidence in their capabilities?
Well, I'm not sure it's the best team she could possibly have, but it's the best team she's had of the team she's had. One guy is named Brian Fallon. Then there's Stephanie Cutter. There's David Plouffe. There's a few others. They know what the traffic will bear in terms of when she has to do interviews and press conferences, how to let the steam out by doing these gaggles that she's done a few of, how to prepare her for the interviews. And then again, if there's a slip up, how to deal with it. David Plouffe, his famous phrase about being in the barrel, that every presidential candidate gets their time in the barrel. And when you're in the barrel, you then face a test of, how does the country see you deal with adversity? They saw Trump deal with adversity after Donald Trump deal with adversity after Access Hollywood. They saw Barack Obama deal with it after Reverend Wright. I'm not sure she'll ever be in the barrel because the press is so favoring her. But if she does go in the barrel, the team she has knows how to get her out quickly and with the minimal pain.
And all those people you just mentioned are notably all Obama campaign vets.
Yeah, they are. Yeah. And they're also Clinton vets too, either Bill or Hillary or both. And they're also, they have her trust. Part of why she has struggled, not just as vice president, but as senator and as attorney general, is she's developed a bad dynamic with staff where they feel she blames them in the past for errors. They felt blindsided because they felt she didn't follow their advice about how to prepare. That dynamic is largely gone now. And one of the reasons I think Republicans are underestimating her is, with that dynamic off the table, her strengths, which are many, come to the fore.
Chris, I want to ask you about former President Trump. He, for about the last couple of weeks, I feel like I've been reading the exact same story, which is a litany of friends of former President Trump, elected Republican officials, trying to get to him and trying to implore him, stop talking about crowd sizes and the vice president's race and who knows what else, talk about inflation and immigration and the stuff people actually care about. It's kind of been mixed, the extent to which he's taking this advice. But there was a story over the weekend that said former President Trump now seems to understand he could lose. Is it based on the people you're talking to in and around the campaign? Do you sense a notable shift coming in how the Trump campaign conducts itself?
I sense they're trying. How well they are doing at it is frankly reflective of the principle here. I mean, I think everybody on this, not surprised anybody on this call knows you hit it on the head and you said it's been mixed. Well, when it's a mixed message like that, that generally means everybody around Trump is telling him to do one thing, and he's kind of doing it, but can't help himself and do a little bit of the other thing. I think that's what's going on. I think that is wise strategy, the counsel you laid out. And one of the reasons I would say that is that if you look at, it's fascinating. Again, I go back to high turnout swing voters, which is the most variable, most audience that's out there, most likely to vote, that you have the biggest potential gain with for either side. And the issue set that they care about is, with the exception of abortion, is all favors Republicans. And so you have the biggest room to gain among it. And it's funny, as you look at our kind of issue ranking, it's the border, it's inflation, it's all of these things that were crime, all these things that Republicans and Trump campaign could get on and point to the present administration with, and potentially swing some folks. But the two that stick out in there, they oppose Trump and abortion. And I think opposing Trump is the bigger deal there than abortion, particularly with high turnout swing voters. They are, I think it's wise counsel to the Trump campaign, to the president, former president, to focus on those issues. I think the campaign is trying to do that, and they're being mildly successful. It's also not his sweet spot, if you will. His sweet spot is the grievance campaign. That's where he feels the most comfortable. That's why I think you see him migrate to that when not coached up.
Mark, are you hearing anything from the Trump orbit as it relates to campaign strategy and how they're looking to adjust post-convention?
Yeah, I mean, a lot. They're just, I'll hit some highlights if you want to follow, of course, too. There's the deluded people who think he's going to be significantly more disciplined, and they're the realists who understand that he's going to have to do it his way, and Trump's going to be Trump. They have had some success with written speeches where they're writing more in his voice, so he's less inclined to go off the teleprompter. So they're putting stuff that sounds like him that you wouldn't no speechwriter would put in a speech for a presidential candidate, but they're putting in because, again, it keeps him more likely to keep him on the prompter. He's going to campaign more. Not everybody's for that. Some people think when he campaigns, it hurts him. I hear mixed things about how much he's preparing for the debate and whether there'll be a debate. And they are raising enough money to saturate 7 states. The Democrats will almost certainly have more, although they're trying to get record-breaking checks from their wealthiest supporters to equalize the money. There's an advisory opinion now that allows campaigns to coordinate, get out the vote, ground game, voter contact with the super PACs and the other outside groups, and the Trump people are taking full advantage of that. I assume the Democrats are too, but they're not being quite as open about it. But they're trying to equalize with less spending. They're trying to make smart choices about how to win 7 states, how to do it as best as possible amongst the 7 states, and then Maine too, and Nebraska too. The biggest confidence they have is she hasn't really proven she can compete in the 4 Sunbelt states yet. She might, but the data just doesn't back up the notion that she's going to be truly competitive there once the bounce springs back. So their hope is, and the more optimistic people have this expectation, that Kamala Harris will be where Joe Biden was pre-debate, which is 1 electoral college path equaling exactly 270 electoral votes, winning Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Nebraska too. It'd be unprecedented to win a campaign that way. But they believe that once the honeymoon subsides at least a little, and they're able to win back the 4 Sunbelt states, all of which they had in their pocket when Biden was the nominee, then they're in a much stronger position. He clearly, if they can do that between now and the middle of September, he's clearly the favorite again, the way he was before the debate against Joe Biden.
Chris, do you think, there are a couple states that, again, just a couple of weeks ago when Biden was still in the race, that, Democrats had just started to write off. North Carolina was one, some of the Sunbelt states, maybe even in Georgia. Democrats are feeling newly confident that maybe they can compete there. When you look at the state level data, what do you see?
They're not wrong. The Democrats are not wrong. Arizona, in particular, is much more competitive, right on the line. Also in North Carolina, I think a little less so Georgia, but Georgia is right there and kind of a tier 2 coming back online. But Arizona and North Carolina in particular are right back in the thick of things. And when I say this with some evidence. Our 3rd quarter modeling is a week or 2 old, not even a week. We were halfway in the field, and former President Trump got shot. Then we had the Republican convention. Then we switched out Harris for Biden, or for Biden for Harris, or Harris for Biden, and we had to go back in the field entirely. So this is a very fresh set of data with the Harris in the last few weeks, and it shows absolutely a change in those states, and tightening as well. The other thing that I wanted to reconfirm, you said earlier, you mentioned a poll that showed Harris up nationally. She's absolutely up nationally. We've actually never had the Democrat candidate, Biden or Harris, behind Trump nationally. Now you can win, as we all know, without you can win nationally and lose the electoral college, but it's not a bad sign. What we have seen in this last quarter is that people are starting to make up their minds. The one thing I would say, kind of defending the Trump world, though, not defending the Trump position, is that Harris has increased the Biden ballot. This is again nationally from 42 to 44.6 on our national modeling. So it's jumped, but Trump has also increased his from 39 to 42. So what you're seeing is, Trump isn't losing votes here per se. He is just in the last couple of weeks, he's adding them more slowly than the Harris folks have. If you think of it that way.
Chris, one more question for you on the polling, and this is just polling writ large. James Carville was on Bill Maher's show on Friday night, and he was, look, he's always the guy pumping the brakes a little bit, trying to focus Democrats' attention. He said at least that number one, Democrats have to be leading by a couple points in the national popular vote to translate to victory at the state level. But the other thing is, he said that polling is still often understating support for Trump. Now, this has been talked about for a long time. Even going back to 2016, this phenomenon of there's people who secretly support Trump, but they don't want to tell somebody that on the phone. Is that still a thing?
I think it's much less of a thing. It still is, but not to the significance of 2016. I think in 2016, it absolutely was a significant phenomena. It's just lesser impact now. There's fewer people that are unwilling in those circumstances to do it than before. Because if you think about it, the battle lines have been drawn in society and all over the place. People stand up a lot more and say, I'm this way or I'm that way. Than they were. There's a little of it. I just don't think it's as significant as it was before. And incidentally, if it's a couple points up, we have nationally, Harris up by 1.8 points right now.
So is that within the margin of error?
Yes.
That basically a tie then?
Yes.
Yeah. Mark, what should we think about the RFK announcement on Friday? He bowed out of the race. He endorsed former President Trump. There's been some mixed, commentary on what that means. Do you think that's going to matter in the end, one way or the other?
I think it would help Trump, or I think it could hurt Trump. I think this is something where data, with respect to Chris, doesn't matter, because what will matter is what happens going forward. Will he campaign in battleground states? Will he campaign with Trump? Will the press cover him? Because it's largely been a press blackout against him. When he speaks about the forever wars, the corruption of the deep state, the corruption of the media, the corruption of digital platforms, social media, he strikes a really resonant chord with tens of millions of Americans, some of whom could be convinced to vote for Donald Trump because of that shared agenda. When he speaks about other things that are kookier, when the press is following the lead of the DNC and defining him as corrupt, crazy, pro-life, linked to Trump, trading a job offer, all of that, he becomes less effective, and he reinforces some of the worst traits of Trump for the kind of swing voters he needs to get. So my guess is, just sort of talking to all three sides about where this is likely to go, is my guess is he'll be a slight net plus, which in a close election could be determinative. But I don't think we can say for sure that it's a big deal, because again, he makes Trump look disciplined. Yeah. He's one of the least disciplined people I've ever covered, and so he could easily hurt Trump by his own conduct if they're linked as closely as right now the Trump people want them to be linked.
Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, Ryan, it's interesting because I think if you look at the demographics and the issues, I think what's happening here, outside of base getting out the vote on either side, and we talked to a lot of clients about it this week, high turnout swing voters is where Harris wants to play and is making some traction. They're going to vote. It's generally speaking suburbia, family, a little more financially established, kids, they have kids. She is making gains there for sure since she took over. The mid turnout swing voters, they're kind of on the bubble, if you will, they're cousins to the high turnout voters, but they look totally different demographically and otherwise. It's more male, it's younger, it's lower income. And their issue set, incidentally, is much more libertarian than their high turnout brethren. They're pro Second Amendment, they're pro pot, they're anti foreign entanglements. They've got financial issues, anything that costs money that they're against. They're worried about inflation. As I've told a bunch of clients, if you're trying to talk to these voters and you're putting pictures of a family sitting around their kitchen table talking about issues, you've totally lost them because that's what they want and they can't get right now. And I think the Trump's campaign, the difference between the two campaigns right now, Harris is trying to win out those high turnout swing voters where she's got some traction with. That mid turnout swing voter, totally different, is where the Trump folks are trying to play. It's a little bit of a harder battle because the total numbers of voters are there, but they're a little bit less likely to vote. They're more disenfranchised. They're most disaffected from the system. I think the selection of J.D. Vance was a play there. And frankly, a little bit of that Kennedy vote will play with that group as well. It's a harder charge because you got to persuade them and get them out to vote, but they lean towards Trump that way. It's just a little bit of a harder play.
I'll tell you what, I agree with what Chris said, and I'll tell you what would make a big difference is if Rogan would have them both, Trump and Kennedy, on together and would just beat the drum for 2 months. If Rogan decided to be on board, and he's been favorable towards Kennedy and not that favorable to Trump, that'd make a big difference because the demographic Chris is talking about, they love Rogan.
Yeah, and we jokingly around the audience call this group of voters the Barstool Bros. There's a reason why the last day of the Republican convention had about as much testosterone as you could push into it as possible. It's because this audience, which is disaffected, kind of pays attention, but leans that way. They're trying to get to that group. And it's the
I'll just say one more thing. Barstool, Rogan. Trump is doing a ton of podcasts, bro podcasts lately, and the national media kind of pretends it doesn't exist. I suspect a lot of people on this Zoom don't listen to bro podcasts, but Trump's doing a ton of them. He'll continue to do it. Kennedy will too. Vance does, and they're reaching millions of people, somewhat under the radar. And that's how you reach and motivate that group that Chris is talking about.
And I'm sure you both saw this. He was on Theo V, who's a comedian, last week, and I mean, Trump was asking him very specifically about what's it like to be high on cocaine, and it was a fascinating podcast.
One of our national models is how people consume information, and that high turnout swing audience that I talked about, cable TV, live TV, broadcast TV, and old school media. By old school, social media, Facebook, Instagram. This other group, this mid propensity group that Trump is going after. As I told a number of clients last week, if you're spending broadcast TV message to talk to them, you are burning your money. They're cable cutters. They don't watch live TV. It's YouTube and new school social media. Podcasts is the way to reach those folks. So Mark's absolutely right. It is a sound strategy to reach a whole host of people that just normally aren't watching normal broadcast television.
But before we open it up to a couple of questions, I want to ask both of you just one quick question about the Senate, because this in so many ways is going to determine, what kind of policy could potentially get passed here in the next couple of years. And just to set the terms for everybody, of course, right now Democrats have a 1-seat majority. They are almost certainly going to lose West Virginia, Joe Manchin's seat. That will almost certainly go to a Republican. So now we're at 50-50. The two big races that people are watching are Montana and Ohio, where you have two candidates in John Tester and Sherrod Brown, who are both very good candidates, who have a lot of money behind them, but they sit in states that are very structurally Republican. What is both of your takes on those races and the possibility that Democrats could hang on to them? Can they hang on to them, or do you think one or both are going to Republicans? I'll start with Chris, then maybe over to you, Mark.
You're going to get me in trouble. I think Republicans win one of those two. It's likely Montana, in my opinion. And I think that if I had to guess today, it'd be a net gain of 2 in the Senate for Republicans, West Virginia and Montana. There's possibly a third surprise thrown in there somewhere, Ohio, Nevada, but as of today, I would say it's 2. The difference in the possibility of winning Ohio is there, but in my opinion, Trump's got to win the state 9, 10, 11 points to kind of get Marino across the line. If you recall, even J.D. Vance, I think won by 5, 6, 7 votes, 5, 6, 7 points. But Mike DeWine on the top of the ticket won by 25 points.
Yeah.
And
Chris, what is the latest polling in Montana, where Senator Tester, who's been there since 2006, is running against Sheehy?
I don't, let me go, I'll go check while we're in the interim here, I'll check some of the national stuff. We don't have a candidate specific poll there that I can speak to. But I will tell you that the generic ballot is, which is a good general indicator, even though Tester overperforms with Republicans, is off the charts to the right. So off the charts for Republicans. So
Mark, I want to ask you, but both for your general take, but also for, to the extent maybe you talked about Democrats at the convention about these races. Of course, publicly, Chuck Schumer, very confident, but that's Chuck Schumer. What do Democrats really think about their prospects to get back to Senate?
I'm nonpartisan, so this is just my analysis. I'm not rooting for the Democrats to keep control, but I think I've been more bullish on their prospects than almost anybody I know. Something's going to give in Montana and Ohio, because there's 2 things that are now rooted in recent history that are pretty firm. One is you don't win a Senate seat unless the presidential candidate of your party wins that state. But 2, you do not beat an incumbent who's well-funded, aggressive, and no scandals with a B candidate, let alone a C candidate. And the 2 candidates in the states you named, which are the most likely, almost certainly, to be this one of the seats that gives Republicans, breaks the 50-50 tie, I'll be generous and say they might be B candidates, but I really think they're C or D candidates. They're both horrible candidates. And if you look, there's about 10 races with Democratic held seats that Republicans could win, but I also think they could win 0 of them. And the most under-commented phenomena in this cycle is when Joe Biden was the nominee, it was true, it's true now. Democratic Senate candidates are doing really well, way better than the presidential candidates. And the one that I think is the canary in the coal mine is Michigan. Mike Rogers is a Republican nominee. He's extremely well known. He's a great candidate, a great Michigan candidate. He's down by a lot again.
Mark, I think you froze up there on us a little. I think you were saying that Mike Rogers is down quite a bit, despite being a pretty talented candidate. Hopefully we can get Mark back here. But let's move on to questions. And if you can just say your name and where you're from. Let's start with Dan. Dan, over to you. Hey, Dan.
Hopefully this question will be for Chris and Mark. 2 quick questions. 1, what percentage of voters do you think are left undecided? And secondly, if there's no debate for any reason at all, who would that help, if anyone?
I'll start with the undecided. Maybe Mark will cue in for the second half of that. It's still a pretty high number. We have nationally at least 18.5%, which is a significant number of people. And again, we've seen this in every election really since 2016, where I would argue a significant number or percentage of the electorate is not decided until very late. So you have quite a bit of voters out there. According to our national, it's 18.5%. And that's about what it was about a month out in 2016. So it might stay there for a while.
Wow. And I don't know if Mark is on, but if he's not, if there's no debate, who do you think that favors?
At this point, with one caveat, if somebody says I'm not going to do it, and that's why there's no debate, and it's clearly this person backing out, I think it favors the other person. But everything else being equal, if there's no debate at this point, I think it favors Harris, because she is. We talked about this last year ago or more. The unique thing about this campaign previous to Harris was that people had a locked-in opinion, one way or the other, or both, of both Biden and Trump. Like, they were defined individuals, which is why, with two clearly defined individuals and so much opinion, why you had this large group of double haters out there, because they didn't like either. Harris, for the meantime, is operating in a vacuum where she's not fully defined in the eyes of the public, and therefore, if you're a double hater of Biden and Trump, you're going to migrate a little bit this way just because it's undefined. And that's, she's benefiting from that. So everything else being equal, I would say Harris.
Thank you for your help.
Thanks, Dan. Mary Beth, you have a question.
Yeah, may have been a little bit more from Mark, but question about Harris and what we can expect. Biden got elected. People thought he was a moderate. He had been in Washington for 50 years. Harris is relatively new. In terms of kind of the political industrial complex that came after No Labels, that group of people, will they have less influence on Harris? Do we think she'll be more independent? I know she has some Obama campaign people. She had signed the letter in 2017 saying, asking to maintain the 60-vote threshold in the Senate. Is there a vibe about who surrounds her, who influences her? Do we know if she truly will be more toward the middle and act as more of a moderate than Biden ended up acting?
So I think we do have Mark back. Mark, you with us?
I am.
Mark, you talked earlier about the communications team around Vice President Harris. Maybe this is a good opportunity to talk about the ideas people. Who advises her, and who's she leaning on in terms of policy, and what does that say about how she might govern?
Yeah, sorry I dropped off. Not sure why I did. So, as I said before, I know her. I've known her a while. I'm familiar with the people around her and her general inclinations. I have no idea how she'll govern if she wins. None. President Obama governed more liberally than President Clinton did. Joe Biden has governed more liberally than President Obama did. President Biden has proposed and done things that President Obama would never have even considered that it would be in sync with what the country wanted or where the country was. And that's the trend in the party. Obviously, partly how she'll govern will depend on who controls the House and the Senate. I think if she wins, Democrats will probably have the House, but not necessarily the Senate, despite what I said before. Her instincts are pretty liberal. They're more liberal than Joe Biden's historically on economics. She's almost an entirely blank slate on national security, and on cultural issues and government spending. She's not been forced to deal with a lot of specifics. If you were to take her actual instincts and the state of the Democratic Party, you'd say she'd govern more liberally, and maybe substantially more liberally than even Joe Biden has, which is more liberally than any president of the modern era. But I'm just not so sure that'll be the case, particularly if she doesn't control both chambers. I'm not the first to point out her political chops were made in a state that's a one-party state, so she's never had to deal with powerful Republicans, and I have no idea how she'll react to that if that's what she faces.
Ronald, what are you?
Good morning from Northern Arizona. My parents talking. Sorry if I missed it. What about the House? What do you think on the House?
My personal view is, look, it's not going to change. I don't think you're going to see a net change of more than 10 seats either way. I think it's just that tight. So now, a net seat of 10 gives a net seat of 8 gives, or 5 even gives the Democrats control right now. I think the assured thing is that you're going to be in some situation R or D control is very much like today, with a majority that's a handful of votes either way, and potentially a small group of people kind of controlling the House, particularly if you're moderates and such, and you can stick to your guns. I think it depends on the size, where the victory goes. But my sense is, I do think there's also going to be a lot of voting, Senate and House, that they're going to go, that people could vote for a hypothetical where I'm going to vote for Harris because I can't vote for Trump, but I want some securities on that. And I'm going to vote for my Republican for House and Republican for Senate. I think you could see a lot of that as well.
Steve Pickard in Connecticut. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. I'd like to ask a specific question about Pennsylvania. One of the reasons I was surprised that Kamala Harris didn't pick Shapiro is because, despite all the discussion of other states, to me, Pennsylvania still seems like it's the most important state. Clearly, when Biden was the nominee, the whole blue wall strategy seemed like the only strategy to victory. My question is, if I'm in the Harris camp, it still looks to me like Pennsylvania is a tough slog potentially. And I guess related to that, all of the strategy of the presidency through the blue wall strategy also assumed that you get the one vote in Nebraska District 2. And it seems like there's still discussion about the legislature potentially going to winner take all, which would mean even the blue wall doesn't win the presidency. So 2 questions. Where are we in Pennsylvania? And what's the likelihood that Nebraska changes their winner to a winner take all approach?
Mark, you want to start with that and then over to Chris?
Sure. I don't know how much you all have discussed the reason she didn't pick Governor Shapiro, but I think when the history of it is written, you'll find that she really couldn't have picked him. It had nothing to do with Judaism or Israel or anything, any issue. It had to do with his capacity to adjust to being her number 2. So I know a lot of Republicans and a lot of people who like Governor Shapiro, and I'm a big fan of his, are bewildered by why, given the importance of Pennsylvania, why she didn't pick him, but it was untenable. Right now, it's hard to gauge any of the states because of the vibes and the momentum, but it is of the 3 states, both campaigns would tell you it's the worst for Harris of the 3. It is if there's nothing changes, I think Trump is the favorite in Pennsylvania now, but the debate could change it. Other things could change it. Her winning back some of the coalition of the ascendant has made it more competitive. It was almost, it wasn't as uncompetitive as the Sun Belt states, but Trump was on track to beat Biden in Pennsylvania pretty unambiguously. Now that the coalition of the ascendant has come back to her, I'd say it's pretty close to a toss-up, but I'd still favor Trump on the current trajectory. So that's the big deal because she's not going to win without Pennsylvania. I don't think Nebraska is going to change it, although it gets very little coverage. Both states are super concerned about both Maine 2 and Nebraska 2, but I don't think they'll, based on what I've been told, I don't think they'll switch to winner take all, and it will be super competitive because it could decide who wins.
Thanks, Mark. Just a couple more questions. Jonathan.
Good morning. A question about October surprise and early voting, with expectations that a majority, 60, 70% of the votes coming in before Election Day. What is the risk of an October surprise, and at what point will we have a better sense of the outcome on Election Day?
Maybe we break it up this way. Mark, why don't you talk about the prospects of an October surprise, and if you were to speculate on what that could be, maybe talk about that, and then Chris, this phenomenon of early voting and how much you expect that to be a factor this cycle relative to last year. Mark, let's start with you.
I have 3 views about October surprises. One is I'm against them. 2 is if I could tell you what they were, they wouldn't be a surprise. And 3 is I think it'll probably decide this election. I think Comey decided 16. I think my top 3 right now would be revelations about Kamala Harris's personal life, something happening on the legal front with Donald Trump, and something involving either a news event, either involving as someone in the country legally or international relations.
Okay,
Yeah,
and Chris, early voting.
Yeah,
Because one of the things that I bet some of our listeners would love to hear, the extent to which election day is no longer election day, I think would surprise people. It's early voting has just taken off last couple of elections.
Yeah, first of all, to buttress Mark's point, as we said earlier, we have 18.5% of the electorate undecided. So when you get a October surprise, that's a big group of voters to swing one way or another. That could be swung one way or another. So I agree with Mark. Absentee early voting. The biggest curiosity to me is we have not heard, knock on wood, recently from Trump or the campaign that early voting was bad and evil and fraught with inconsistencies such that you should not vote that way. I think the Trump campaign or the former president did a disservice to Republicans last cycle by talking down early voting and perhaps suppressing some available vote that would have been out there. I do think, you're right, Ryan, the election day is not election day exactly anymore. In many states, over 50% of the vote has come in. It's not been counted yet, generally speaking. All state laws allow you to start counting those votes on election day or even after the polls close on election day. But in many, many states, over half the votes have come in already on election day via voting absentee or early. So it is a big deal. And if it is done right, and this is my second concern, I don't necessarily have inside knowledge of this. I know the Trump campaign talks a lot about ballot security. And what I don't know is how much they're putting into actually turning out votes, finding people that are lower on the propensity scale and getting them to go vote, as opposed to watching what the results in and perhaps challenging ballots. I've always been one personally that thinks you got to get them in there first before you start challenging them and worried about ballot security.
Look, thank you everybody for joining this edition with No Labels Talks. Mark Halperin from Wide World of News and Two-Way, new interactive live video offering, and Chris McNulty from Causeway Solutions, really great data provider. Thank you both as always for joining us. Hopefully we can get this roundtable back again soon. And in the meantime, everybody have a great week.